Welcome to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. Over the next half an hour, we'll be looking beyond the business headlines by giving you in-depth perspective on the stories that are affecting all of us. Today's show is a special Channel's Business Global, and we'll be looking back at some of the major stories we've covered during the COVID-19 lockdown, from the initial fears of the pandemic to the devastating global economic consequences and the company news that overshadowed the coronavirus. Channel's Business Global has been there to share the details behind the headlines. To mitigate against the vicious spread seen in Italy, the British government unveiled a £12 billion package in an attempt to protect the UK economy. Measures will include a business rates holiday for businesses with fewer than 250 employees and the refunding of sick pay by the government for small companies. The measures were announced hours after the Bank of England cut interest rates from 0.75% to 0.25%. David, you work with many small to medium-sized businesses. SMEs in the West, but particularly here in the UK, are the engine of the economy. And potentially, you know, we were all laughing about it before, but we've seen it in Italy. 60 million people have been advised to stay at home. Could this happen in the UK? And are businesses prepared?
Of course not. We have a saying here, don't we? It'll never happen in a month of Sundays. I think we're about to get a month of Sundays. And this is one of the issues that, you know, the way the economy has been worked by the government and the tax systems and the what have you, and the pressure that's been put on individual businesses. I mean, one of the programs I enjoy is Country File, and you go out and you look at the farms and what they're doing and how they're bringing this technique and that technique. Well, they can't do anything when they've got several thousand acres underwater, which is another impact on the UK economy.
Of course, you're talking about the flooding, aren't you?
Exactly. So there are people who are being taken right to the edge. So what I would be expecting is that there will be some leniency coming through from the government over VAT payments and other requirements to help people through that. I heard yesterday someone talking about providing loans, and that may be necessary as well. But for many people, I can see my way through this week, I can see next week, and I'm supposed to be paid my salary at the end of the month, but if my company's not working, what happens to me?
Absolutely. Only God knows what's going on in Italy at the moment. We know, of course, that Rome being one of the centerpieces for tourism in Europe, and the restaurants are just completely bare at the moment. I do want to trickle it down, Jamil, to the ordinary person. Of course, Mark Carney, the outgoing Bank of England governor, the superstar governor, as people call him, and he's done his last trick before he hands over to his successor, Andrew Bailey, and he has cut interest rates by half a percentage point from 0.75% to 0.25%. How does that affect ordinary people?
You know, when it comes to the Bank of England governor, if we look back on his 5-year plus term, we always consider something of a jack in the box. You never quite know what you're going to get out, because he's famously said before, on many occasions, interest rates would go higher, 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 and they didn't do so. And at the same time, when he warned of a cut, they didn't do that either. But today, you know, you have the biggest shock of an emergency decision. And this is the first time we've seen an emergency interest rate cut since the global financial crisis. So, of course, in terms of concern, is recent history repeating ourselves? We're seeing a lot of synchronized moves. Generally, though, cutting interest rates from 0.75 to 0.25%, it can support businesses. It does support those with mortgages, as long as they're not in a fixed-term mortgage. So it's there to provide some relief to the economy. Should the UK economy get into a more negative and fragile state of where
a recession? A recession.
Well,
dare I put out the ugly R word? We've had the statistics from the Office of National Statistics saying that GDP rate in January was flat. There's no growth in the UK. 3 months to January, there was no growth. They called it the Boris bounce when Boris Johnson managed to get a monumental victory. But then, unlike Italy, unlike America, unlike China, we have Brexit, don't we? You know, we were going into these trade discussions full of gusto. But now we've got COVID-19. The European Union banned non-essential travel from outside the bloc into 26 nations, stretching from Portugal to Finland, home to more than 400 million people for 30 days. This comes as Europe's leaders have accepted that the continent is now the epicenter of the global pandemic, and trying to fight it will mean severe social and economic hardship. I don't like to ask simple questions, but I have to. What is life like in Milan under lockdown?
Well, to be honest with you, it's a difficult way of living. People are still unsure if they should be out or shouldn't be out. Across the last 24 hours, we've had 8,000 people have been issued with fines in the north of Italy for being out where they shouldn't be. But it's not that clear from the government whether you can go out to, I don't know, to walk the dog, to go running. There's been a lot of talk that you must stay in your home. You're currently allowed to go out to the supermarket, you're allowed to go out to the pharmacy, but it's still really not clear whether you can be out of your house or not.
Of course, and I can hear those sirens behind you. Many of us have, of course, travelled to Italy, and you can almost feel, even just from watching it on the TV, just how tense it is at the moment. Alex, you haven't been living in Italy for that long. Can you just bring some context into this? Over 30,000 cases, almost 3,000 people dead. How has Italy become the epicenter? Are people discussing this in the media? Is there any criticism at the moment being pushed anywhere?
At the moment, here there's mixed feelings, really. Most people agree with the measures that the government have taken to try and stem this epidemic. But what you have to understand is this is a country where people do stuff face to face. So you can see how it has transmitted so quickly. Many people have large extended families here. The act of having a meal with your family is a big deal here. People go out for breakfast, lunch and dinner. It's no surprise that a virus like this that thrives on contact to contact has spread.
Billions of people across the globe are currently living under lockdown as governments take extraordinary measures to contain the spread of the coronavirus. Sweden is one of the few countries in Europe to have resisted implementing a strict lockdown.
We're going through the different process here in Sweden to most of the rest of the world. We're of course seeing the impacts. Of course, Sweden has got a very different view to this, keeping the sick and elderly people isolated. And I think this is the right strategy as well. We see, for example, a country like Poland, which locked down very early, 10th of March, closed its borders. The curve in terms of infections and deaths is actually very, very similar. And, we're also seeing these lockdowns causing other problems as well. Mental health issues, depression. In the UK, for example, you over there can't even have a drink and feeling stigmatized, having an aperitif during a Zoom or Skype call with friends and family. And of course, this is wrong. Moderation is crucial, but having a small tipple doesn't really pose a problem for the vast majority of the population. And even we're seeing that studies saying that it actually helps older people as well. So we need a sense of proportion in what's actually happening here at the moment.
The Munich-based economic think tank, the Institute of Economic Research, predicts that the German economy will contract 6.6% this year and won't recover from the fallout of the coronavirus crisis until the end of 2021. Germany is seen as a positive success. It's almost being used alongside some countries in Southeast Asia, having, tested, managed to trace. The lockdown measures have been eased. Is that felt within the borders of Germany?
You know what, Juliana? I would say yes and no. And let me just quickly explain. So the sentiment is being felt because, thankfully, as you've said, we've not seen scenes of hospitals beyond capacity or overpopulated mortuaries in other European countries that have far smaller population. Is far smaller population than Germany. However, we are definitely not out of the woods yet because, for instance, Berlin, the capital, is building a larger hospital, a very large COVID-19 dedicated hospital. Now, that tells you that there's no government, if you understand what I mean, that would spend money building a dedicated COVID hospital if we were really out of the woods. then we're also reminded every day on television, on radio, about the fact that we need to keep our basic reproduction number. Now, that's the rate at which one patient infects another. They say we need to keep it at below 1. And we're told every single day that if we don't keep this number at below 1, we might end up with a collapsed healthcare system as early as October.
According to the World Travel and Tourism Council, the travel and tourism sector faces a staggering 100 million job losses due to the COVID-19 pandemic. 100 million jobs in the travel and tourism sector. That is staggering. As somebody who runs a successful business within travel, what's the reality of that number?
Hi, Juliana. Thank you for having me. Hope you've been keeping safe. Thing is, this is our reality now. WCCC has predicted that 100 million jobs will be lost. As we all know, for about a month now, or even 2-3 months in some countries, there has been a lockdown. That means no domestic travel, no global international travel, which has affected their sales. And obviously, if there are no sales, they can't make money. And a major problem for them is they can't predict the future. Everything is uncertain. So the best decision they can make now is to either cut staff salaries or lay them off.
An economic crisis under President Emerson Mnangagwa has revived memories of the hardships of more than a decade ago when hyperinflation wiped out savings and pensions and forced the country to dump its currency in favour of the US dollar. How are Zimbabweans coping with COVID-19?
Well, Juliana, things are quite difficult in Zimbabwe because Zimbabwe is fighting for probably what you might call economic wars at the same time. The country has been under sanctions for almost 2 decades now, and that was already hurting before the COVID-19. And then the country went through a drought, which was quite devastating. And also the country is just recovering from some cyclone that attacked the region, Mozambique, Malawi, South Africa, Zimbabwe. There were so many problems then. And then you are now talking about COVID-19 and other crises that are at play. So life is very difficult. But Zimbabweans are resilient. They're trying to do everything that they can to cope. But it is, no one will lie to say it is not difficult.
Millions of Americans are expected to vote by post for the first time in November due to concerns over coronavirus. Yet, counting such ballots in recent primary contests has taken weeks, and President Donald Trump has claimed that they are open to fraud. The state of the economy and civil unrest are also major headline grabbers stateside. Now, like all of the other G7 nations, America has entered into a deep recession. We're seeing a contraction in a quarter of above 32%. I know this is a silly question, but clearly this is going to be a really painful recovery, isn't it?
It's going to be very painful, and it's going to be painful for a long time. That is, the short run, obviously, we're going to see some increase in GDP and increase in employment. But I think where we stabilize is nowhere near where we were a year ago. I think that we are going to suffer the consequence of this, and I think this is true in the entire Western world. We're going to suffer the consequence of this for close to a decade, not just the economic slowdown that has resulted from COVID and the shutdowns and the lockdowns, but also government's response. I mean, the governments across Europe and across the United States have basically responded to this by printing money, by intervening in economies in unprecedented ways. Central banks are doing things that, yes, they did a little bit of after the financial crisis, but now they're doing it on steroids. They're doing it on a scale. And how do we get out of this? How do we pay back the debt? How do we get out of a Federal Reserve with a balance sheet that is enormous? I fear that we're really entering a period, maybe a decade long, of zero growth. We're definitely all becoming Japan now. And that is not good. It's not good for anybody in the economy. It is particularly not good for those who are still struggling and who got hit really hard from COVID. It's going to take a long time for people in the working class, for restaurants, for people who worked at restaurants, in stores, in malls, recover from this. We're going to feel this a decade from now.
Coming up on Channel's Business Global, we'll be flashing back to some company news that managed to overshadow the COVID pandemic. And we'll be broadcasting an interview conducted earlier in the year with Jeffrey Dennis, the CEO of the Society for the Protection of Animals Abroad. See you after the break. Welcome back to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. Today's show is a special Channel's Business Global where we're looking back at some of the major stories we have covered during the COVID-19 lockdown. Here's some company news stories that sparked our attention. Amazon has launched its grocery delivery service across 300 postcodes in London. Amazon Fresh offers same-day or next-day deliveries for shoppers subscribed to Amazon Prime. It has about 10,000 products, including fresh, chilled and frozen food. It comes after figures showed online shopping now accounts for £3 of every £10 spent in the UK, up from £2 before the coronavirus outbreak. Uber has announced that it will be launching a riverboat transport service on the River Thames in London this summer. The American company is partnering with Thames Clippers, which operates river cruises and boat trips in the city. The deal will see Uber slap its name on Thames Clipper riverboats, as well as several piers, which will be rebranded as Uber Boat from Putney to Woolwich. Online fast fashion retailer Boohoo has announced it will be launching an independent review of its UK supply chain after being engulfed in a sweatshop slavery scandal. The company said in a statement that the board was shocked and appalled by the recent allegations and was committed to working to rebuild the reputation of textile manufacturing in Leicester. The scandal has wiped almost £2 billion off the value of the company. The devastating effects of the coronavirus pandemic are reverberating around the world, but nowhere will suffer more acutely in the long term than developing regions. These parts of the world have a greater reliance on working animals, such as horses, camels, donkeys and elephants for transportation and trading. And as financial pressures increase and the economic crisis escalates, these animals and the vulnerable communities they support will bear the brunt first. Jeffrey Dennis, the CEO of the Society for Protection of Animals Abroad, spoke to me a couple of weeks ago about the work his organisation is doing to raise awareness about the plight of these working animals. Jeffrey, thank you so much for joining me on Channel's Business Global. There's been so many fallouts, haven't there, from the COVID-19 pandemic. As soon as you heard that there was a global lockdown, were these animals the top of your concern?
Yeah, definitely. I'm the chief executive of SPANA, who look after working animals in 30 countries around the world. A number of those countries have been in regular contact with us because of COVID-19. There are two serious issues. One of them is because of lockdown in a number of countries, for example, Mali, Mauritania. The owners of working animals don't have any work anymore for them. They literally can't get any work for the animals. So the animals and their families are starving. I mean, they don't have any money, so they can't afford to pay for the money for their families. They can't afford to feed the animals. So that's one problem. In some countries, those that have tourism, example, Morocco and Tunisia, there's no tourist trade. So the same applies. The animals are absolutely starving.
You talk about tourism and tourism playing a major role in this. Clearly, the tour operators need to, take some responsibility, which is a given. What about tourists? Do you think tourists are aware of, some of the negligence that is happening to the animals that they're happy to ride upon? Do you think there needs to be more awareness there?
Well, the thing that we do in a regular basis before COVID, so what we do is we do free veterinary care for animals in 30 countries around the world. But one thing that is really important to me, and I think it's really effective, is community training. We do a lot of work with the owners of animals, explaining to them that they've got the wrong harness or they've got the wrong rope system and so on and so on. And it is true that once people start understanding what they're doing wrong, the vast majority of the people in the world really do care about their animals. We also do education for children, and then the children talk to their parents and say, do you realize that animals actually have feelings? You need to make, and once that animal becomes part of the family, then I think it's great. The problem we have with COVID is that there isn't any work. So, as I said earlier, the owners haven't got any money to actually feed their families, let alone the animals. And then secondly, the animals then go kind of wandering around to try and find food, and they eat rubbish. And then they get plastic in their stomach, which gives them infections which can be deadly. So what we're doing as Spana is, one, we've got free and we're doing emergency feeding programs in a large number of countries at the moment. And secondly, we have vets, because we have vets within our system anyway, who are addressing these issues of colic, which is the infection to the stomach. And we're saving the lives of thousands of animals as a result of it.
Well, it's wonderful work, and it's such a serious issue, isn't it? But something that sometimes people can overlook, if not for organisations such as yours. You said there has been some communication between your organisation and some of the countries that you represent. What about the governments? Have they been understanding to your cause?
Yes, they do. We've also done a lot of work in the past on this donkey skin trade, which you might have heard about, but it's basically taking the skins of donkeys and turning it into cosmetics and Viagra in China. And a number of animals have been stolen or bought from countries. So we've worked a lot with governments on that issue, and the governments have been very, very responsive to that. With this particular issue, with the COVID issue, yes, we're talking to government ministers as well. We're actually working at the moment in Ethiopia, Tanzania, Mali, Mauritania, and Morocco, and we've got 2 or 3 other countries that we're working in. We found funds in the UK to give our country directors in those countries some funding so that they can provide feeding, which is very effective, but also veterinary assistance when there are issues like colic.
Well, you've mentioned several regions across Africa. Is there any particular nation that stands out for you where there is more of a concern?
Certainly, Mali and Mauritania are 2 of them. In those 2, I mean, there are an enormous number of working animals, particularly donkeys there. In Mauritania, all of the water in Nouakchott, the capital city, is carried by donkey cart. There's no fresh water there. So it comes in massive tankers and then it goes out. A lot of those donkeys can't work at the moment because of the close down. There is also a drought situation in that part of the world as well. So that's something that we're regularly addressing. In other countries like Tanzania and Ethiopia, there are enormous problems there. We've spoken to a lot of our other countries, so we're in regular contact. I mean, overnight, I've had about 6 country directors speaking to me saying, yes, we've got an issue with this, can you help with that, and so on. So we're doing the best we can, but literally Spana is saving the lives of thousands of working animals around the world at the moment as a result of COVID. So it's fantastic stuff, but it's hard work.
It is hard work. It's fantastic as well. We're running out of time, Jeffrey, but before you go, could you just expand more on some of the solutions? You did mention training and speaking to children because, they're likely to pass on this love for the animal to their parents and kind of adopt them. What are some of the other ways in which people can assist you?
Well, basically, what we're doing, there are 5 things we do. One of them is free veterinary care. Second one is training local vets so that gradually we can pull away from countries because the local vets can do that work. I'm a development economist, and that's very important to me, that bit. Community training. Anytime anybody brings an animal to our vets to get free veterinary care, if they bring it for the 2nd or 3rd time with the same issue, then we say to them, that's absolutely fine, we'll help you, but let's explain why you're bringing that animal back again, because you got the wrong harness or the rope system or whatever. Education is really important, and I've seen some wonderful play acts done by children who then, who actually initially think, well, a donkey, does it have a brain? Do we care about donkeys? Now they really care about them. So they talk to their adults, their parents about it, and they give them little plays where they say, don't hit an animal. It doesn't help, doesn't make it go any faster, and it gives in infections. So, and then the final thing is emergency work that we do. Which we do in many countries after cyclones, and in this case, or after drought situations, which we've done a lot of work in northern Kenya and in Tanzania recently on drought situations, providing fresh water for both people and animals. And then, of course, the COVID situation. But I would just encourage people, please go to our website, spana.org, and you'll understand what we do.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jeffrey, for that thorough analysis. You are really doing work that usually goes unnoticed, but is so rewarding and really does help not just the animals, the community, doesn't it? So Jeffrey Dennis,
Absolutely.
the CEO of Society for the Protection of Animals, thank you so much for joining me on Channels Business Global. Sadly, that's all we have time for on today's special Channels Business Global, but do get in touch with your comments and suggestions. I'll see you at the same time next week for more in-depth business analysis on Channels Business Global. Goodbye.